So the same.
One.
Good afternoon, everybody. We will start the session soon. We are just giving another 2-3 minutes for all the people who need to join us. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session in a series of online webinars for the Department of Justice addressing the Gender-Based Violence Amendment Acts. Today's session is the strategies to eradicate gender-based violence in schools. And we are looking forward and we are welcome Ms. Neni Tululu from Department of Basic Education. Are you in the house already, ma'am?
Yes, I am, Francisca.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to hand over to you. I'm going to ask you to please do your introduction and also to speak to the topic at hand. I will monitor the chat, and later the last half an hour would be reserved for questions and answers, please. So I'm handing over to Ms. Neni Tululu from the Department of Basic Education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francisca. Good afternoon, everyone that is in the call. I have requested Ulwando to flight the presentation for me. As he is flighting, I just want to indicate, colleagues, that within the department this whole day we've been struggling with the network. So I have actually decided not to use the camera because then the network gets to be affected so severely. Having said that, I am certain that a number of colleagues that are sitting on these calls know me personally, and I know them personally too. But be that as it may, I would want to just briefly give you an indication of who I am within the Department of Basic Education. I am Dululu, and my name is my surname is Neni, and I work within the Department of Basic Education under the Social Cohesion and Equity in Education Directorate, and this is under the branch called Care and Support, led by the Dr. Granville Whittle. Our key responsibilities is broadly under human rights and nation building, and therefore as social cohesion we have a number of programs that then support that broad notion of nation building as well as human rights. I am this afternoon going to indicate to you or sharing with you how, as the Department of Basic Education, are really contributing to the space of the prevention of violence, in particular school gender-based violence in our schools. And I am going to share with you a number of strategies that as the department we are embarking on. I must put it up front that the Department of Basic Education will never do this work without the collaborations and working together with all of you that are sitting in these calls, because I strongly believe that you are a parent, you are a colleague, you are a friend, you are belonging to different civil society organizations. And in that instance, we therefore require for all of your support in whatever possible way that we could have. Let's move, Lando. The outline of the presentation, as you can see, there is three key strategies, in fact, two, because the last one is the conclusion. The first one is really just to share with you, giving context in what our discussions will be based about, but also it is, I am certain that a number of issues that I'm going to be sharing with you under the context are issues that we are familiar with, and there are issues that we are well conversed with. But key to that is the levers that we are using as the department in terms of implementing the school-related gender-based violence, in terms of its prevention and in terms of its response to. And then obviously the last key bullet would be around conclusion. Let's move, London. Let's move to the next. Yes, that's the slide I am looking for. Colleagues, the first slide is really about the indication of how early childhood development and the interventions that we are expected to do that are going to prevent stereotypes and also gender discrimination. We all are aware that gender identities are formed as early as 2 years within our children, and also through their intellectual ability. By the time they are 6, all those gender stereotypes have also been formed. And these stereotypes, they really contribute to the gender discrimination and equality, and they have a very lasting effect around how our children are going to believe, how our children are going to experience attitude and show their attitude, but also generally on their behaviors. And we know for a fact that all of these have an impact on us as DPE in terms of our learning outcomes, in terms of the life choices that they are going to choose in their life as they develop, and in terms of the relationships that they are going to form as they also growing old and they develop. Really, the key message within this slide is just to indicate that it is important for us for intervening early to prevent gender biases, social injustice, and inequities. Let's move. And then around issues, the learning environment. We know that we have socialization. That is one of the key structural factors within GBV. Now, we know for a fact also that this socialization happens in our home, but it influences largely our educating settings, because what they are learning at home likely has got an impact in how they are going to be influenced with their education. And we as adults, unconsciously, we reproduce these practices because this is how we have been raised ourselves, and we have a tendency of, exposing them to what we have been taught and believed. And also, we know for a fact that educators often do not identify these gender stereotypes because thank you. Lando, can we really get to mute everybody so that we minimize the disruptions? Thank you. As I was saying, colleagues, in terms of the learning environment, is that our educators, we know that they do not often identify these stereotypes because of various reasons. Either they are adults like we all are, and they are doing this unconsciously, but also because probably their training doesn't, give them a sense of how best they should deal with these issues. Our teacher training is really limited around gender issues, but there is some work that through other slides I am going to share with you as to what are we doing in terms of helping that identification. Individual practices, but I think also this point is just to say that individual practices, they also, influence broadly the school processes. And what we are learning from this slide is just early learning environment. They hold a potential to actively challenge and transform gender stereotypes and norms. Let's move. Now, the last slide on the context is also about early interventions. We know that we are a country that is considerably tolerance for violence. We know we've got high rates of IPVs, and the rape is widespread, and we also have the highest number of intimate partner murder in the world. And there is that percentage that SNMen disclose rape perpetration. But what is also important to note here is there is a section of our population that is particularly vulnerable, the LGBTQI+, and children associated to accept social norms that fuel GBV, because as I indicated on my previous slide, that we as adults, we also have the tendency of socializing them in a manner that we also think and believe. And I think the last part here is that interventions that seek to change ways of South African children are socialized lie at the core of addressing GBV in South Africa. And I will share with you about some of the programs that we are using as DBE in terms of dealing with that, starting from the foundation phase. Now, I am going to take you through these levers for implementation that as DBE we are using. There is 5 of them, which is curriculum and its assessment, implementation, learner-teacher support material, teacher training and development, and co-curricular enrichment programs, as well as advocacy and information. Now, starting with the curriculum and assessment implementation, largely DBE uses the CSE, which is the Comprehensive Sexuality Education, which is what it provides age-appropriate prevention education that builds resilience, confidence, and assertion amongst young people who often do not know when they are being violated by predators. It also CSE, that is, provides scientifically accurate information, build positive values and attitude, which enables young people to safely navigate the transition to adulthood. And there is also a number of other principles that the CSE, aspects to. Issues like culturally sensitive, issues like the CSEs being transformative, and so on and so on. But the core aim of the CSE really, and its LSPs, and LSPs are scripted lesson plans, and I am going to talk more about them in other coming slides, is to ensure that we help learners build an understanding of concepts, content, values, and attitudes that are related to sexuality, sexual behavior change, as well as leading safe and healthy lives. I want to stress out the point that the CSE is comprehensive sexuality education that we as DBE are talking about. We are not talking about any other sexuality education that might come from other angles. But as I am talking, you will then get a sense of what is the CSE in our curriculum that we are using as one of the levers to actually eradicate school-related gender-based violence. Now, as I indicated, that GBV is addressed through the provision of CSE, which also include sexual and reproductive health services, and it also has a focus on the prevention of alcohol and drug abuse, as well as learner pregnancy. We're mentioning COVID, colleagues, because I don't think that we are clear of the COVID-19 as yet, but we're just indicating that these are some of the risk factors to the GBV, and these are some of the risk factors that we are going to outline as we go on with our presentation. Then we are also indicating as to how are we going to do this, or how is this CSE actually assisting us to ensure that it gets to be implemented and understood by our learners at different phases of their life within the education system. In primary schools, let me rather start by saying that CSE lessons are delivered through a total of 80 lessons, implying 80 hours in the life skills and life orientation subjects. And within that, 80 lessons, 29 of those lessons specifically addresses issues around gender-based violence. And colleagues, I know 80 hours might not be enough, but internally, DBE is trying to strengthen issues, the curriculum, and we might be in the future seeing or getting a sense that these hours around these issues around life skills and life orientation subjects are going to be increased. But as it stands right now, everything is within the 80 hours of those 80 lessons. Now, coming to give you a sense of what happens within CSE, within the curriculum, is within the foundation phase, we start by addressing issues around bullying, safety of the body, protecting personal space, prevention of rape, reporting of sexual abuse and sexual harm, with the view of empowering the potential victim. Colleagues, I need to emphasize that this is a foundation phase. These are children that are between the ages of 6 to 9, 10, I think. And when we speak to them, we will not be able speaking issues as deep as other phases. That is why one of the key broad principle within CSE is that our information is age developmental, so that a child who is at the foundation phase get what is required for him or her at that particular age or at that particular phase. Now, when we go to intermediate, we begin to introduce issues of bullying again, with sexual abuse, sexual grooming, skills for bullies to change. And this is coupled with identification and linking to services for learners at risk. That is broadly what is covered within the intermediate phase. Then the senior phase, we introduce the construction of gender. We talk around issues of consent. We talk around issues of power and control in relationships, as well as assertive communication, because they are now beginning to be older. They are now at the beginning a high school, and they now have a sense of what they have been taught in the previous phases. Now the information gets to be added or gets to be strengthened. And then the FET phase is when we address in depth the issues of gender construction, the issues of consent, power and control in relationships, as well as assertive communication. And these messages communicate both to the potential victim and perpetrator with a view of challenging their attitudes in the communities. As DBE, especially if the perpetrator is also another learner, we have the responsibility of trying and correcting that behavior. Thank you. And then the second lever for us that we are using is the learner-teacher support material. And I would want to give some background into it so that some of the things as I am sharing with you, you understand where they come from. So as the department, there was an evaluation of a broad sample of existing textbooks, as well as LTSM, which is the Learner Teacher Support Material. And this evaluation was really broad because it evaluated only the existing textbooks, a sample of that against stereotypes and discrimination towards the promotion of diversity in education. And what also is important to note within this evaluation was the fact that it had variables that it focused on, like variables on race, gender, class, religion, disability, sexual orientation, family status, and age. And broadly speaking, what came out as conclusions from that evaluation of the broad sample of the textbook, or I must indicate, colleagues, that it was not each and every textbook, It was a sample of the exiting phases. That was phase 3, 6, 9, and 12. So it focused on particular subjects like history, mathematics, and English, as well as isiZulu. So those were the samples that were taken for this evaluation. Now, broadly speaking, what the conclusion came was that our books, for instance, they do have race and gender that reflects the demographics of South Africa and the diversity of the country. However, there is a distinct disproportionality in the ways in which different groups are captured. So there are those other groups that would be captured in this particular fashion versus other groups. And there are other groups in terms of race and gender that were non-reported to be in our textbooks. Second to that was the issue around the LGBTQI+. It was really represented. That is what the evaluation gave us as one of the conclusions. But it gave us an indication that textbooks have a strong orientation towards the middle class. So meaning the values, the preferences, and the decisions on the subjects were that of the so-called middle class in South Africa. And there were very big, notable silences and omissions in terms of religion, in terms of family status, and in terms of disability. So those were just the broad conclusions around these evaluations. But then, based on the recommendations, one of the overarching recommendation was that as DPE, we needed to deal with the content and the pedagogy of these textbooks, and which is then going to be reflective of our continent, reflective of the country, but also with the global context. And this should be linked with the debate around the issue of decolonization of education. And then one of the key recommendation was that the textbooks needed to deal more effectively around the issues of pedagogy, speaking with issues of inclusions and speaking on issues of equity. And that also indicated that it meant that DPE has to revise ECAPS and has to revise a catalog system so that we are able to ensure what has came out of this evaluation of textbooks then is effected. Now, since the evaluation, we have been having constant engagement with the branch called curriculum, where this bulk of the work resides. And what we are doing is to raise awareness around issues of e-publishers, issues on writers in terms of what the evaluation has indicated to us, so that as they move forward with the catalog, as the catalog is being reviewed, and then a number of these issues are then catered into and are taken into consideration as the new catalog of the textbooks are being developed together with our LTSM. So that's just a summary of what that evaluation actually did to us. It showed us the gaps, but also it showed us where we should focus on those gaps in terms of the textbooks. So this is work, colleagues, that I wouldn't be comfortable to put a timeline on. The reason, because these are issues that are developmental, these are issues that are also raised as and when a situation changes around the country. And the review of a catalog, it cannot be done alone. It also has to be done with the strengthening of ECAPS, and also those are internal processes that DPE is undergoing. But what is good about it, at least we have a sense of how we need to intervene based on these variables that the evaluation focused on. We also have scripted lesson plans for the delivery of CSE. The reason why we came up with scripted lesson plans was the fact of supporting educators, because within the CSE, there were issues that some of educators did not necessarily have information, but also did not have the know-how of how they can present these in the classroom fashion. So that is where the issue of the scripted lesson plans came about. We also have workbooks for life skills, which are already within the system for grade 1 to 3. And I must talk about this because I have, my son is doing grade 3, and the life skills book that he is using really speaks about issues, the bullying, about him, providing his personal space and so on, and him understanding his body parts as an individual. So those are the workbooks that are available across the country from grade 1 to grade 3 in terms of the life skills. We also have the 9 new state-owned open source around the life skills and life orientation for grade 4 to 12. And this has been developed in English, and currently we are translating these textbooks into other languages and adapting them for use in special needs education. That suggests that in the future we will have the workbooks that would not only be in English, but they would also be in other languages that might be dominant in that particular province. The third lever that we are using as the department is around the teacher training and development. I have already indicated previously that our educators are not necessarily well versed with some of the issues that relate to GBV. So on a continuous basis, we try and capacitate and empower them. And one of the things that we are doing as the department is, now that we have a policy around learner pregnancy, now that we have work that we have done with higher institutions around basic education and GBV, we have then formed a reference group with universities to develop a CSE module for educator students in South Africa. And this is work in progress, colleagues. And when I mean CSE, I mean it includes issues of GBV. We even have a manual that we are hoping we are going to share with the universities in terms of developing these modules. And the manual is called Opening Our Eyes, and it is directly, for educators in terms of how they can try to deal with the GBV in schools. We also have the life skills, life orientation teaching guide, which also, is an it's a support to the textbook, so that as they are implementing through the curriculum, as they are dealing with these issues that are in the life skills and in the life orientations, they are able to be guided as to how best to deal with particular aspects of school-related gender-based violence. We also have a pre-service training, and in this instance, I would want to indicate that we're working with the British Council together with 10 universities to actually train teachers that have got BEd and those that are in the PGC, which is the postgraduate certificate in education. The Teaching for All that we are working with the British Council includes modules that talks to care and support for teaching and learning. It talks to issues of human rights. It talks to issues of inclusiveness. And it just generally sensitizes education about children's rights, but not only rights, together with their responsibilities. And we are currently working with the provincial education departments to ensure that this Teaching for All course is given to all provinces, but also it needs to be digitized so that at least we are able to get a wider reach of this course. We also have the Gender Responsive Pedagogy Toolkit, which is for early childhood education. At least with this one, I am proud to say that this work even began before the shift of ECD to DBE. Now, what this toolkit, the GRP toolkit, it supports school leaders to promote gender equality and prevent discrimination within the foundation phase. What are the important aspects that are covered within the GRP toolkit? One of them is about how classroom and outdoor areas should be or are organized, how the learning materials is shared, and how are those learning activities and interaction and even the language that is important to note when you are dealing with this kind of group. But then through our social partners, one of them VVOB, as well as the ETTB SITA, we then came up with some material or resources that we felt it would be necessary for us through the training that it would keep on giving support to these practitioners as well as educators of this. And that we developed a practical guide for school leaders around the gender responsive toolkit, but we also have a manual or a resource promoting gender equality in the ECD space, and it's a practical guide for teachers and practitioners in South Africa. We also have a number of other advocacy material, like the tips on how you could actually promote gender sensitivity within the space of ECD as a parent or as a practitioner. Let's continue. And then the fourth lever is the co-curricular and enrichment programs. Colleagues, I know that the curriculum space is a territory that is contested. So for us as DPS, particularly as Branch S, we have co-curricular programming that we have that supports what is expected to be happening within the classroom through the curriculum. And a number of these programs, some of them which are not mentioned here. For instance, we have a nutrition program, which I think all of us are aware. We have programs that speak to sports. And I must mention that within DBE, the sport that we are talking about is not competitive sport. It's sport that children need to keep their bodies healthy. But if they then are able to actually be developed to a competitive sport, then that is also allowed. Hence, we are working with a number of relevant stakeholders in terms of sport development. But within us as DBE, we have also a number of co-curricular and enrichment programs that we are talking about. We have a program that speaks to values in education, where we are promoting constitutional values as the common set of values. We do focus on a number of those values: respect, non-discrimination, non-sexism, but we also try and focus more on equality. We also have gender empowerment, which is partly the CSE that I've been talking about. But now when we come to this gender empowerment as a co-curricular activities, or as a co-curricular component, we have also a number of programs. One of them, which is Girls and Boys Education Movement, which is a peer-led education movement where we are saying that learners should engage other learners, of course, with the assistance of an educator or a practitioner or an adult. And this is where, again, we are bringing a number of civil society organizations to our school so that they then assist us to make this CSE be implementable, but also to actionalize the CSE so that children begin to relate or align what is being taught in the classroom vis-a-vis the co-curricular activities. We have a number of organizations. One of them is UNICEF, which has got a lot of edutainment activities that are linked to the curriculum. And because we know for a fact that young children, they also like to be educated through play-based activities. We also have the adolescent girls and young women, adolescent boys and young men program, which is really about building resilience within young people. And this is also a program that we are assisted by a number of organizations through a global fund. We also have sexual diversity and gender identity. Colleagues, I must indicate, these are issues that are coming on top of my desk almost daily. How much learners in schools that are from the what is considered not a norm, a gender norm. So we really have a number of activities where we talk around issues, the harmful gender norm, and therefore we then saying we need to change. But we base this around the values in education, particularly on the value of respect, to say before anything else, you need to respect a person as an individual. Linked with that, we have now developed drafts around the Sgps. Oh, I'm going to talk about it in my next slide. Let me pause it there a bit. We have also ending school-related gender-based violence, where we have a number of sub-programs under that to say we are also members of the prevention pillar under the NSP, which is the National Strategic Plan for the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide in this country. And we do share a number of programs that we are taking in as DBE under that pillar. But also we are having a responsibility as DBE under Pillar 3, which is broadly speaking around issues, the response. And that in particular for us is around the issue of vetting of educators. And I know this attracts a lot of interest, and I know why it would attract a lot of interest. But just to give you a sense of how far are we in terms of this? We are working with the Department of Justice. We are working with the Department of Social Development in terms of Pillar 3. And what we have done so far, we have identified at a provincial level our HR practitioner as those that are going to assist us into the both registers that they should actually be exposed and understand what are the processes of those registers, so that as the new intake of educators are coming in, then they are the first point of call for us to indicate whether these people that are coming into the system are suitable for that. But I must also indicate to say, because we have thousands and thousands of educators within the system. We are working with the Department of Justice to ensure how best are we going to vet these, because both educations do not have enough resources to actually just go on a full scale in terms of vetting all of the educators that are within the system. But what is good to note within that response, colleagues, is the issues around clearance certificates. We are using clearance certificates, at least for now, that each person is expected to actually present. However, because there is a financial responsibility linked to that, and some of these educators, at the point when they are asking for employment, they are not as yet employed. So it raises an issue around how then are they expected to pay for that clearance. And there is some work that we are also internally doing in terms of us asking, in fact, to ensure that, in fact, to request if they cannot be exempted to that. But that is work that we are internally doing through the Office of the Minister. We also have the district-focused engagement on the protocol for the management and reporting of sexual abuse and harassment in schools, as well as learner pregnancy policy. Now that the learner pregnancy has really been, approved, when we go to this district-focused engagement, we using the district developmental model, where we engage all of our district relevant stakeholders. And we then take them through as to the consequences of not reporting and the consequences of not even understanding what the protocol is actually indicating as one of the tool to try and deal with the issues of sexual abuse and harassment. We do have a number of webinars with learners, especially with during the time serious lockdown. But we do, because we also kept our responsibility to ensure that young people are kept busy, but also because we were informed that the high rates of abuse was really happening during the time lockdown. So we held a number of webinars with learners on different topics, just to keep them motivated, but also to strengthen and capacitate their resiliency and understanding of what are these issues around prevention broadly of violence in schools and in our community. We also form part of the Violence Prevention Forum, because we also share, but we also need to learn as to how do we then can strengthen the strategies as DBE from those that might know better than us. We also have a program around assisting our orphanages, our orphan and vulnerable children. And we do these things through our program that we call Jamboree for Future Choices. And this is really around career guidance, and we're doing with it intergovernmentally as a service delivery approach. And we now have started also including other essential services that we might be necessary to share with our learners in our communities. We also have a Technogirl, which is a program, a structural intervention on exposing girl learners around issues science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And we take only girls that are coming from quintile 1, 2, and 3, because these are the girls that are fairly disadvantaged in terms of them being exposed to these STEM careers. And we are also trying to respond to the need of the country in terms of young girls that are still lagging behind in terms of the engineering and technological field. We also have the oral history that has also been included in the curriculum and heritage education, where we're highlighting the equality trajectory, including gender equality. And we're doing this with all the provinces in the country where learners are exposed to actually giving research programs, and they are then expected to give orally the history that they would have learned through the program that through oral history. We also have commemorations of significant anniversaries. And when we celebrate these commemorations, because a number of the time they're really speaking to women, not necessarily to girl children, but we try and align them into what then the benefit could be for a girl child, because as they develop, they are eventually going to become women, and they would want them to become women that are resilient, women that would be able to make better choices for their lives at the right time. We also have the social inclusion, and I must colleagues indicate that this working group, we really, really appreciate the work that they have done working with us, because this is strictly our engagement with some civil society platform group. And through this group, we were able to develop the guidelines that I'm still going to talk about in my next slide around issues that gender diverse and sex characteristics and all of those things. And for us forming that group, it really made us aware about the gap around these LGBTQI plus communities, that we still have a very long way to go in terms of us understanding and also supporting them appropriately. Now, the last lever that we are using, colleagues, is around advocacy and information. And I'm sure if Nkeleteng is in the call, she's one of our ambassadors. I call her our ambassadors around advocacy and information. Of course, colleagues, because we are a Department of Education, we have a number of advocacy material. And these advocacy material are on our website, and if colleagues are willing to go and check, they are free to do that. Opening Our Eyes, a manual for educators on addressing GBV in South African schools. And this is the manual I earlier mentioned when I was talking about the reference group that we are engaging on with higher education institutions around the CSE curricula that needs to be informed within the curriculum education in the higher education institutions. So this is the manual that we have, and we are willing to share and say, this is what we have. Maybe it could be something for as a starting point. We have the Prevent Violence in School series of manual. We have a learner handbook. We have a facilitator and mentor guides. And this also speaks to how young people can actually, advocate amongst themselves to ensure that they prevent violence in their schools, but also in their communities. The Speak Out is a much more familiar one and wanted one, because it's about how they need to, how they have to prevent sexual abuse in their schools, because it's a learner booklet. And out of the Speak Out, we really even developed some posters that we are sharing with schools, so that as they have engagement, they can use those posters. I know one of the posters that I like is the posters that speaks around issues of reporting. Why reporting? Who can report? Why that particular person can report? And so on and so on. We also have guides around CSE, educator guides and learner books for all the different phases that I indicated earlier. We also have pamphlets that are speak out against child abuse for educators, for parents, and for learners. And we are trying to sensitize all of these different levels within our schooling system to say, what is expected of you as an educator, what is expected of you as a parent, and what is expected of a learner. One thing that colleagues for the longest time that we have done is also assuming that children cannot abuse themselves. And some of the information that is now developing, new information, is actually speaking to that, to say it is also wrong for learners to abuse themselves, and there could be consequences as such. We also have issues around addressing bullying in schools. We also have the protocol that I spoke to earlier. The guidelines for the socio-educational inclusion of diverse sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sex characteristics. That's the SOGIES, colleagues, in schools. This is a draft, and we are about to go countrywide about its consultation, and I would really request colleagues in their different organizations or different levels where they are, when we are in those provinces, do make a turn. We will try to make it as wide, popularize it as widely as possible, because we really want to get strengthened, this document being strengthened, so that when they are given to schools, schools are able to at least use them to the betterment and to the improvement of the prevention of discrimination. We also have the guide for our girls and boys education movement, which is, I must say, it's a guide that we are working on with UNICEF in terms of just reviewing it, because it's a bit oldish, if I may put it that way, but it's a guide that actually, gives a sense as to how learners in schools should actually begin to establish this movement. What are the things that they need to do and how they can do them? But linked to this, colleagues, I want to indicate something that is very interesting to me. We are moving, or we are strengthening our RCLs within the education system. And this is also in response to what the minister has always indicated to us to say. But we have an official or a legal structures within schools called RCLs, but we never hear about what is their positive contribution into the issues that are affecting themselves as learners, but also affecting their communities and their schools. So we are working with all the relevant branches within the department, but also working with other relevant stakeholders that are going to assist us to ensure that we are in one way pushing for one movement of South African school learners that would then be talking the same language. And I think we do have a lot of content that we can do that. We just need to ensure that we are aligning ourselves properly, so that all of these work that they have been doing in their different clubs in their schools forms part of the RCL, so that it doesn't become a nice to have, or it doesn't become something that it depends upon an educator that would be passionate about assisting them. The legacy series, Over Century, The Life and Times of Charlotte Maxeke, all of those are the legacy series that we are developing to try and capture the history around women and celebrate the contribution of women in the South African history. So what we do, we have those booklets, and in those booklets, we always try to get activities that would be relevant, so that as they learn about these positive contribution that women have in the country, they also are challenged to actually think creatively about how, as these new and upcoming, women, young women, they are going to also make positive contributions into the lives of their schools and in their community. And lastly, colleagues, the TV and radio advertorials, and in brackets, I've included the Breaking the Silence there. because we do have these TV and radio advertorials that are also trying to actionalize CSE. We did have a TV program called Breaking the Silence that was happening on SABC 1, I think, during the month of April earlier this year. And this is relating exactly to what the topics that are found within CSE. Topics like bullying, topics like peer pressure, topics like gender power, topics like assertive communication, and topics around how do you plan your life and how do you keep to your protection plan. So all of those are some of the advertorials or TV's thing that we are doing as an advocacy and information. We also had live radio advertorials to a number of community radio stations that we called Live on Madlala Street, which also talked about the very same topics that I've given as an example that were talked about in the TV session. But because we wanted to expand the reach, not only talking to the learners in the classroom, but also begin to have conversations with parents and community members on the very same topics that are within CSE. I think the last point that I did not include, not that one. And then my last slide, colleagues, there are 2 bullets that indicates that you can see through my presentation, I hope so, that there is more work that requires all of us and all of our attention, because at different levels where you are, you have a responsibility to support UDBE. It's either you are a parent, either you are a practitioner, you are an educator, you just have to have a way of assisting and supporting DBE in terms of ensuring that this work that we are trying to do, it really gets to have a focus and an understanding. But for me, in concluding, is also to indicate, colleagues, that the more we could be integrated in terms of utilizing our limited resources for it to benefit more beneficiaries, I think it could be better. Because I think for now we are so much into silos, and that doesn't necessarily assist either of us. So if we could at least have that integrated fashion of how we utilize all of our limited resources, we could be able at least to reach more of our beneficiaries. I thank you, Francisca, and I hand over back to you.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, everybody present, colleagues, friends. That was Ms. Dululu Hlacheneni from the Department of Basic Education. I'm going to open the floor just now, but my first address, Dululu, is to please, if you can explain to us, in terms of the CSE, we now seen that it is focused on all these various phases. But I'm a woman that is going to be 32 years in connection with some form of education in this country next year when my son completes matric. So I've seen this education system goes through ups and downs and changes, and a lot of interaction, and sometimes a lot of anger with regards to parents, with regards to the changes that is affected, especially in terms of the CSE. I will speak to that just now, but firstly I need to understand most of the after-school care operators at schools, yes, I presume they are vetted by schools. We would hope so. But most of them are not the teachers at the school. We need to make a point that those operators, first of all, be vetted as well, because parents pay for after-school care. But we also need to know that they would also be required to look at the CSE and to follow some of the comprehensive strategies that the Department of Education has put in place. And we are aware of the fact that the Department of Education has various tiers: basic education, higher education, and so on. So can you please speak to that quickly for us, please?
Thank you, Francisca. I'm not sure if I really heard your question, because I think for me, what I heard was just a comment, which I am going to agree upon, to say all those that are coming after schools, they need to be vetted. That is a point that I will not dispute, because as long as they get to be closer in contact with our learners, we need to know, and we need to know how they are how they can assist the education system. But I also want to indicate, to say that schools do have processes of how they need to bring who to schools. And I think we are at a national level, but when you go to a province, provinces are then requested to actually give an indication as to who is supposed to go to school. And part of that is what you have already indicated in terms of the vetting. And when we are talking this after schools, I want also to mention something, that whoever that is going to our schools has to respect the contact time, and have to agree with that particular school in terms of how the whatever program that they are presenting will not directly affect the contact time. And when I speak to these issues, it raises issues around also issues of safety. Because if, for instance, the school is going to agree to say, we can only allow you for an hour from 3 to 4, I'm just making an example. There are learners in some of our schools that use transport. There are learners that are still walking distances that needs to be, those things need to be factored. So we are saying, please work with the school, agree with the school as to what would be implementable in that particular school.
Right. And now my follow-up to that is, if everybody is at the school, the teachers, the after-school operators, what is the context of trauma identification? In other words, if the child is normal or with, fairly withdrawn at a school, but for a teacher to understand when a child is withdrawn to a certain extent, or aggressive and bullying to a certain extent, that is in fact a trauma response. What is the level of training with regards to the CSE and your other programs, the LTSM? When I look at that, how is a teacher making that assessment? Do they have assistance? Do they have training for that? Where does it fall into place, please?
Thank you very much, Francisca. Trauma identification, withdrawal syndromes, and all of that, how does it factor in, and how does the educator begin to assist in that person? I think it would be unfair for me to come in this platform and expect that educators will be trauma counselors, educators will be psychologists and social workers, right?
Yes.
And having said that, it is also good for me to indicate that not every school in this country has got services of such, be it a psychologist, be it a social worker, be it a counselor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what the department is actually trying to do, we are working with a number of organizations in giving such services that might be required. Lifeline is one of them. Teddy Bear Clinic is another. I'm just citing examples. But what the department is working on now is a program that we have that we call learner support agents, right? These are young people that are then given basic training around identifying those withdrawal symptoms. And because we are aware that they are not professionals, we are also indicating that they need to establish the referral system within the areas where they are. They can use the TCCs, for instance, they can use any other relevant organizations that would be available in that particular school. So that if a case has been identified, then that case is able to be referred to the relevant department or a relevant other civil society organization. The learner support agents, we are working, I know for a fact that it's not in every province where you would have learner support agents. So we rely largely on other government departments that might be then giving that particular service. In this instance, I am particularly referring to the Department of Social Development.
Thank you. I was just wondering, and especially looking at the chat, for instance, one of the first comments was from Nomsa Papale that said, as NGOs, we are available. How can we be part of the programs? If we are dealing with schools, and schools has got a certain construct within the community that it operates, I think most of the people that attend a school would be at least 50 to 60% serving the greater community in which it is, and only some learners will travel from other areas to attend a certain school. Is it not then wise and a probability for the Department of Basic Education to assess, and I would suggest that due diligence be done here as well, NGOs operating in the areas, especially in the areas of child support, and who can become part of the national program, who can be empowered to assist in assisting not only the Department of Education, but also Department of Social Development with regards to aftercare services, with regards to assisting traumatized children. I saw June from the sheriffs, Johannesburg Sheriff, said that she's certain that we can also do counseling on the abused students in terms of GBV. There's a lot of goodwill in South Africa. There are a lot of community-based organizations and larger organizations like my national outreach in WIN, Women Integral Impact Network, that has a lot of volunteers, a lot of professionals, a lot of social services, psychologists, people that can be helpful. And I'm just wondering, should a platform not be created at a school with the school governing body and Department of Basic Education, where those volunteers within a community who meet the criteria can assist in interventions, because we really need a lot of intervention, as we have noticed, recently. So what is your take on that, please, Dululu?
Francisca, thank you very much. I want to ride on your point of goodwill from South Africans. I think as a department, we would be unfair not to acknowledge the goodwill of South Africans that are really trying their level best to support our learners in schools. And also riding on your point, the earlier point that you indicated around the services that need to be vetted, people that are need to, because we do not want just to give a free for all approach that every other I would call civil society and inclusive of everyone, be it at a community or NGO, and that they can just easily go to school and aim to be, doing whatever that they are doing. But we really, really appreciate the goodwill of South Africans and who have good intentions of wanting to improve and assist in the development of this country. The issue around SGPs is very important, because SGPs in schools are the ones that are supposed to kind of like agree and say, Francisca, you can come. Dululu, you cannot come for these various reasons. And that is why we are appealing to South Africans to say they need to work together with the SGPs of the schools, because there are particular activities, or there are particular things that the national office where I am sitting cannot be able to really deal with, because they are at a level of the implementation and they need to be dealt with at that level. And through our protocol for the management and reporting of sexual abuse and harassment, we do give particular responsibilities to SGPs. And one of them is to ensure that they assist in the vetting of who is being brought to a school. So what I'm trying to indicate, colleagues, is just to indicate that it is important that we form healthy relationships at a level where we are, so that healthy relationships then benefit our beneficiaries, which is our learners in this instance. Whether you are a parent, whether you are an educator, whether you are a practitioner in whatever format, at least at a level. Recently I was in Northern Cape, in a very rural district, just forgotten the district, but I was in a primary school. You know what impressed me? As I came into the principal's office, there was a chart with a number of people that you can contact when you have a particular challenge. It was SAPS, DSD, Department of Health, and so on and so on. But what caught my attention was a number that they could call for a psychologist. And my mind was racing to see, in such a very small area, how on earth will they get a psychologist? You know what the principal said? She said, this is a retired psychologist in the community who then came to the school and said, as and when there is a need for me to avail my services, just let me know. I make an appointment. And this service is for free. So I'm just saying,
I've seen that, and that is also what I'm alluding to, Dululu, is that there are a lot of community-based organizations or NGOs or civil organizations that operate in the areas. And I think what I'm trying to get to is the clarity. I think when these organizations are offering and want to get involved in the school environment, that maybe they should, approach the student governing bodies, or the school governing bodies, and at university, yes, even the student governing bodies. So there are these bodies that can be approached, and an agreement formed of how assistance can be dissipated into the community, how retired people in the community with valuable skill sets can be accessed. That is a great example you just mentioned. But I also want to caution, because, and that's why I'm asking, and when people listen to this recording in future, they need to have clarity. Even perpetrators can even hide in NGOs. As we see that, pastors can even be the perpetrators of sexual crimes. So, ultimately, everybody is responsible, and that alludes, again, to the Amendment Acts that is now placing the responsibility on all of us. So in a school and education environment, everybody always cries Department of Education first, but you as the parent of that child is the first person that should be responsible. And the schools, the teachers, the governing bodies of the schools, we are all responsible for the welfare of the education system per se, but also of its students. So I really need you to please speak a little bit about the accountability and, the practical applications thereof. Should somebody identify a crisis, a situation with a learner at school, what is the process until it gets made known to the department, until social services get involved? How is that process supposed to run? And also, how are we ensured as parents, as people, lawmakers, as various departments, civil servants, public, that these strategies that are so well thought and structured within the Department of Education are in fact implemented at school levels. South Africa, we had an inspector system. And now today, we have things in the news of a pedophile, a repeated pedophile, that made a whole crazy, I mean, it's almost unthinkable that this person was operative so long in KZN. We have schools where children fall into toilets. I would have thought, if we had an inspector system, that these shortcomings and needs would have been noted by somebody who is doing that now, who visits the smallest little school in the most rural little village, and realizes, what, these toilets aren't unsafe, or there's, when it rains, the kids are going to sit in with rain dripping on their heads, or really, what, there's just something off here. That is what the amendments were for. The amendments is not only for education purposes, but to be actualized in practical application, safeguarding, first of all, with education, our children and the greater population, because those children grow up. And unfortunately, it would seem by the rate of our GBV and femicide in our country, that most people raise big traumatized children and not adults. So I want to know, unfortunately, a lot of the onus fall upon our judiciary and upon our education systems, where parents are absent, or sometimes even the perpetrators. How is it implemented? What are the practicalities? What are the consequences and the sequences that has to be followed? We are all accountable. Please, Lulu, can you speak to that for me? Thank you.
Francisca, thank you for raising a very contentious issue around reporting and how much I think as a country we are not doing what we are expected to do in terms of reporting. I think that's my opening statement in this session, to say as much as it should be clear, not only for the Department of Basic Education, but I think for every other department, how probably you need to report. I think this is a country challenge that we have for various reasons that we are not reporting as to what and how we are expected to. And in that fashion, we are then a country that seems to be protecting perpetrators over I don't want to use this other word now. Survivors. We are then a country that protect perpetrators over survivors. But coming back to DBE, the protocol has got a process of how sexual abuse and harassment should be in a school context, should be reported. First and foremost, the protocol indicates that the issue around the number of or the longer time that the case would have been reported does not have to disadvantage that person, doesn't have to take into context that it's because it's 2 years has lapsed and now it's only now that you are reporting. That's number one. But also, if a victim discloses in a school context, even if the abuse happened outside the school context, the principal, as the accounting officer of that school, has the following responsibilities. Firstly, the principal has to ensure that he or she informs the grade teacher, he informs the parent, and then by the levels, the circuit manager, which the principals report to, and then from the circuit it goes to the district, and from the district it goes to the province. Now, when the protocol then suggests that there are particular levels that schools are encouraged to deal with, right? And according to the protocol, there is levels 1, 2, and 3. And these levels are the levels that are expected to be dealt with by the managing committees that are within the school, your school support-based teams, and I don't know what they are called else, but they are called a different name in other provinces. But those are the committees that are within schools that have been formed through our National Schools Safety Framework. And these are issues around if a child might have written a graffiti, for instance. I'm just making an example. But if then it gets to be a level of level 4, which is a level of serious sexual assault or rape, then the protocol indicates that that particular case has to be dealt with by the relevant authorities, which is in this instance the SAPS. And it has to be dealt with that. And the protocol then says, it declares the principal to say then, the principal informs those committees, informs the SGPs, informs the chairperson of the SGPs of what would have happened. And through the form that is attached on the protocol, they used that form 22 to actually just locate the relevant details that might be necessary for that particular case to hand it over to the relevant authorities. So level 4, which are serious cases, are cases that schools are not expected to be dealing with them. Now, you spoke on issues of amendment that is broadly talking to issues of infrastructure and a number of other issues. And unfortunately, I am not at liberty to be talking around issues of infrastructure because they belong to another branch, and I wouldn't have all the relevant information that relates to this issue. Maybe the next one we could try and link them up so that they speak for themselves as to how, as infrastructure, they then speak to the issues of prevention of violence.
Thank you, Delulu.
Thanks.
I just want to read you a comment from Liko Botterman, and then I will open the floor for questions. I see there were 2 hands raised. I can't see who, and I'm going to ask Luanda to assist me. Liko wrote here, the legislated platform of engagement with parents is through the National Consultative Forum of School Governing Bodies and the comprehensive sexual education process of the DBE was consulted with through this platform. In terms of the CSE, that is the sexual education curriculum, the DBE has an obligation to consult with the education stakeholders beyond SGBs, including unions and other organizations. That was also complied with. The noise that we observed around the CSE was in reality just a reaction on acknowledgement of sexual and gender diversities in the curriculum. So the argument of non-consultation was simply a smokescreen. Frankly, I must say I am very, very glad because of child sexual education. Because, you know, as an activist, if you have a child of 4, 5, 6 years old who is experiencing sexual tampering at home, for instance, and has grown up with that, if the education system does not teach this child that this is incorrect, that poor child will be very far along the way before it is discovered. So I am very, very happy for the CSE as a parent myself. So I just think it did a lot of good. I think the first hand, Luanda, if you can please assist me, I think was Advocate Kambula. I'm going to ask Advocate Kambula to please ask a question or raise a topic. Advocate Kambula, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francesca, and thanks to Lulu for the presentation. That unfortunately was done in my absence, but I'm listening now to the interaction between yourself and Francesca. It's just for me to raise 2 things which really are quite disturbing. And I think that as a country, we really need to act. We need to rethink our strategies and re-engineer the country response against sexual violence. We have been at our courts recording the high number of charges of rape. I don't mean sexual offenses. I mean rape perpetrated by children. And rape is the most serious charge of sexual violence in the country because it involves the sexual penetration. And in our country, it has been perpetrated by children and also against children, both. So in 2020, 2021, where we were expecting it, because this has been going on, even, during the first COVID year. So, but we were so perturbed when we learned that from our statistics. I'm talking about the cases that are registered in our courts. I'm not talking about the reported cases. Reported cases are the cases that get to SAPS. But when a docket moves from SAPS to our courts, it's a registered case, all right? So I'm talking about the registered cases. So meaning that then it is usually just a drop in the ocean of the cases that have been reported to SAPS that come through to our court system because of number of issues, the delays in the investigation and so on, all right? So, but we registered during 2020, 2021, the first year of COVID, where movement was restricted severely. Most parents were working at home, but we had a 22% increase of children who perpetrated rape. And amongst because we collected the top 10 offenses that are perpetrated by children. And in the previous financial year, it is still rape that is the top crime perpetrated by children. I'm not talking now about children who steal sweets. We lost those children. I don't know what happened to them. Because right now we have children who are actually raping. First 3 top offenses that children perpetrated in the previous financial year, which was, of course, still the second year of COVID. First, it was rape, followed by housebreaking with intent to steal and theft, all right? So that's a property-related offense, that one. And one can expect it from children. So the third one, it was murder. And for the very first time in the history of South Africa, we had 50 children who were convicted of murder. Never recorded that statistics before. I don't mean children who are charged with murder. I mean children who have been taken through the court process and be found guilty. And all of them had to go for imprisonment, got the imprisonment sentence. And it's such a sad situation because we have a Child Justice Act that is actually minimizing in terms of our constitution. Section 28 of the constitution, it says that a child must be taken to prison as a last resort. But because of the seriousness of the children, the way that, I mean, the violence, the seriousness of the violent element in the crimes perpetrated by children, our courts had no option but to take them to imprisonment. So what kind of future are we having in South Africa? Is there anything, because we have to nip this violence perpetrated by children in the bud. And one will think then of the school environment as one of the areas where this needs to be considered, because children spend most active hours of the day at the schools. What is it that the schools are doing? I missed your presentation, but I believe that it might have covered some of these. But I'm giving you the statistics. It's a sad situation. It's something that we need to work on. Now, what we have done in order to stop this kind of situation is with the 3 GBV Amendment Acts, all right? And of course, if you talk about the court system, is there at the tail end of the criminal justice system. So we are reactive, all right? So we need then, and the DBE is expected to be proactive, all right? So now with the laws, we have amended Section 54 of the Criminal Law, Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Act, so as to tighten the reporting, all right? Tighten the reporting of these offenses, any offense, sexual offense perpetrated against a child, all right? Against persons with mental disability, against the older persons, that is against vulnerable persons. Let me mention, then say the vulnerable, because now we have a category of vulnerable persons. We say that now, then any adult person in South Africa must report that offense, and the failure to do so amounts to a crime. So it's a provision that places legal obligation, not legal responsibility, because there's a difference. Legal obligation, so meaning that the failure for an educator to report that it's a crime. So it's one thing that I will urge then DBE to include this, because I know that you do have a policy framework, all right, on GBVF. You need to include Section 54 so that educators are aware of the situation. And now, moving as soon as this is what we are planning to do, is to ensure that then we have this provision executed. We need to see, so we don't want to make an example of the educators that will be charged. So this act, this provision doesn't say that cancel a child. No. It says that as soon as you have a suspicion, doesn't mean that you need to have to actually be the eyewitness of that sexual act. It says a suspicion is enough for you to go and make a report to police that this child, I suspect this child has been sexually violated, all right? And the same thing that we have done with the Domestic Violence Amendment Act, all right, which will also require you to amend your policy, because we have incorporated the same provision there. And in that, in the Domestic Violence Amendment Act, it places that legal obligation, and it also criminalizes bystanderism in matters of domestic violence. So when you see a child who is subjected to economic abuse, all right, a child who is subjected to, we also have now what we call, it goes beyond the sexual violence and end, all right, because we have increased the types of abuse that constitute domestic violence. But it places then the legal obligation on the educators and all other adults in South Africa to make that report, all right? So those were the things that I think that we needed to join hands with DBE and unpack, sort of look into the strategies that they are having, and have some kind of a workshop where we'll be looking as to what is it that we need to do as all stakeholders to address this situation. It's very, very, very serious. And when you talk about children now who have been the victims of sexual violence, I've just finalized a report recently, yesterday actually, on sexual offences, which is going to be tabled in Parliament. You are aware of it, Dululu. So it places statutory rape as the third top serious offence, sexual offence perpetrated in South Africa. I mean, in South Africa, statutory rape coming third. Rape coming first in the country. So now what it means is that children are also not safe. We are a country that is sexually violating our children. We are also a country that is a breeding space for child sex offenders. What is it that we need to do, all right, to prevent this situation? So that's my biggest concern. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Advocate Kambula. I could not have said it better. And that is what I try to highlight, Delulu, when it comes to us addressing accountability in Department of Basic Education. And in view of the stats that Advocate Kambula provided, what is the Department of Basic Education doing urgently in terms of preventative policy and strategies? The CSE is not, as far as I'm concerned, going to take care of the preventative aspect. It is more a way of identifying and giving people access if they want to. But how is the Department of Basic Education knowing what is transpiring in our country, knowing that these children that we are raising today, that are actually internally violent, they are going to be the adults of tomorrow? And that is what I'm alluding to. And that is why I said, we have to look at trauma responses. We have to look at preventative education and giving our children methodologies and structures of negating their trauma, of dealing with their trauma, and of implementation at schools of strategies where we teach children these methodologies, where they can learn how to deal better with their trigger responses, their trauma responses, so that they can get to the point where they are dealing with their rational response and can approach a teacher and say this is happening, or can approach a parent and saying this is happening. We know a lot is happening because children feel mortified and shamed. And if it's a parent, it's to tell the teacher, or if it's a teacher, to tell the parent or another learner. Children don't speak up because they are mortified. They go into this physiology response, the freeze response, and they do not get to the rational response because they are trapped in trauma triggers. And these are also the indicators about why we have this heightened perpetration of violent crimes by youths. You are talking to me about the British Council. I was the one who presented to them on trauma triggers now in the last months, and civil society of Britain to incorporate some strategies in their curriculum, because there are various schools globally that has been doing certain things since the 60s, but they are they record, they process. We talk about it at UCLA or Cambridge, the social sciences departments, but it does not really become an active, responsive and preventative part of our education. And that is what I want to address. When are our schools going to start actively, not only in terms of the CSE, but in terms of training our children, giving them tools to deal with the stresses, to calm the stresses, where they can actually verbalize their trauma and their distress. That is very important. Please answer that, and then we're going to conclude with Gregory Ngongane, that has been waiting very patiently for us to conclude. Thank you, Lulu. I would like to hear that response, because I've been at the Department of Basic Education about this topic for 15 years.
Francine, I think thanks that for bringing this up as well. That I think a couple of things that we need to be very clear about it today as well. That one is that we are losing the call when it comes to children. A number of things that's being dealt with. Let's start looking at the safety protocol at schools as well. That when you look at Amendment X as well, that I don't even think that the department yet have moved any age in terms of changing the safety protocol, because that protocol has been updated. It's just better English every 5 years and being rewritten in terms of things which happen. There's a key issue that it needs to change completely in order to adapt and the issue of safety of children as well when we have a look at our aspect as well. Then there's another crack that we keep on forgetting about it. I'm glad that Trace have raised it today here is there that when you start looking at children then creating murder, where does it actually exactly started off? It starts then in the school ground then where there's a lack of anger management training programs and trauma counseling happening at school level as well then. You also start at the same teachers then themselves then who are actually going through the back door resigning of sexual offenses. I'm going to quote a couple for you now. One, 5 years ago in Kimberley there, a deputy principal impregnated a disabled child who got a psychiatric problem, mental, basically that. You know what happened there? The department that made this person need to resign, he never faced then the issue then at the bargaining council where he needs to take responsibility of his action in one aspect as well that. There's very other few there. There's more than 35 cases in the last 5 years, I know that, in the Northern Cape, which have happened like that as well that. 4 years ago, we had massive headlines, one impregnating a whole classroom dealing with 16 kids in Kuruman. What happened in that case as well there? A nice media thing that we'll investigate, it never come back to the base of it as well there. So then you come back to the Schools Act as well there, where there is SGBs, there's another disaster to happen. Because there's no clear protocol between the schooling then and the SGBs as well, how to deal with this matter as well then. It's again a question that whose child are you, whose sister are you, so that we can deal with the matter when it comes as well then. So there's a lot of issues that we need to have. Maybe it's time that we should have a virtual where we bring in the Department of Education, with the unions, with the bargaining council, and start looking at the issues that what are clear effects and defects of the Amendment Act actually in terms of the issue of domestic violence as well in the school level. And have a look then at the regulations that what they've developed, is it actually talking to us as instruments to utilize the inward aspect as well there. And also look into the department's education constitutional mandate as well and partnership with the policing, because what happened to the program now, which the department have thrown out of the windows, where we said adopt a core vision actually at school level as well there. It was a very good program to start looking into the safety protocol of school. And today that we are seeing this type of situation as well. Truth be told about today that we got a very beautiful piece of paper of the Department of Education when it comes to as well that when it comes to children that it's something else, Francisca.
Thank you so much, Gregory. I cannot agree with you more. And Delulu, I'm throwing this curveball at you because you are here representing Department of Basic Education. The title of this session is Strategies to Eradicate Gender-Based Violence at Schools. How do we eradicate something if we are not preventative? Everything that is shown, and it is good, we are all agreeing that what is there in place and what you've shown us is good. But that is all about very much about addressing. And we all know that children have a problem of reporting these matters. We all know that. So I want to see, with regards to the strategies in place, that the Department of Basic Education are addressing strategies of teaching children the tools to get rid of their trauma, that internalized trauma that leads to bullying, that leads to low self-esteem, that leads to low academic marks, that leads to hopelessness because I'm a child, I don't know how to tell my teacher that something is happening at home, and I am stressed so much about it that I feel powerless. But tonight I must return home to where the offense might happen, or tomorrow I must come to school where this big bully is going to bully me again. But this poor bullying is a trauma response. Nobody in his right mind goes around bullying people. You have to have some severe impediment to become a bully. And I don't see that. I've not been seeing that in Department of Basic Education, for the last few years. So when are we going to step up and take all these wonderful things that we already have in place, like the CSE and all these systems, and be accountable? And if we say we want to eradicate something, let us do. But we must start and we must include prevention. You must prevent and you must address what is, and you must treat what is in process. we must look at this holistically. And that is why I wanted to ask my question specifically. When we look at the school governing body, when we look at the teachers, even the prefects, the people that are supposed to be in charge of the school, should we not train trauma response and identification? Is that not the first response that should be in terms of eradicating GBV at schools? I think it is. I'm going to hand over to you, to Lulu, to please conclude. Sorry, but this has been a long-standing conversation for me. As I said, I've had 32 years of Department of Education in this country, and we just seem to have all this band-aid mentality, and it's got to stop. So can I please have a response to that? I'm sorry that it's yours to have this banner, but unfortunately it is. So Dululu, I'm handing over to you for a response, please.
Thank you very much, Francisca. You don't have to be sorry about what you feel and how you feel it and how much you want to see change. I don't take it personally. I am just absorbing all from Usis Praise to, I think, Gregory, and to yourselves. I think all what you have raised is aligned as to much more work that the DBE has to do in terms of prevention. And I want to say to this forum that some of the issues that have been raised are issues that are beyond me. And as such, I am going to take this recording and ensure that those that are in authority can listen and hear by themselves as to how are we expected as DBE to deal with the issue around prevention. And the idea that Usis Praise raised around the workshop, and I think no Gregory around the workshops of bringing right people at the right conversation, including the unions, I think that is one thing that I am also going to take out of the discussion, because it is important for those that are beyond me to also understand, and also understand the impact of all of this legislation and the amendments that have been alluded, and so they are also able to guide the system into the right direction. So I really appreciate all of your input. Thank you, Francisco.
Thank you, Dululu. You know what? Yes, I'm not apologizing for the way I feel. I'm apologizing, Sham, that you had to come and pick up this banner, because it is years of dealing with gender-based violence, years of identifying a person that visits small villages and big schools and seeing really the width and breadth of this beautiful country, and seeing how our children are neglected, of having raised my own and interacted with their friends and took charge of problems in a friendship circle, because there's just this absolute apathy. And I'm so glad, just one thing about these amendments that I am more grateful for than ever is the accountability, that we are all accountable now as adults, and that our legal obligation is now set for all of us to have to adhere to. And I am looking forward and to see where this goes. Department of Basic Education, I attended a few of your annual conferences in the last years, and I just want to see this happen, that there is a prevention strategy that can, dissipate the occurrence of gender-based violence, not only at schools, but can also empower children when they have to go home and face adversity, and give them the strength and the tools to affect change in their environment, as small as they are. You must remember, it is the human body that is small, it is not the spirit. As long as there is tools in place, we don't know what a young child can do. We've seen young children do amazing things in this country. I believe in this country, I believe in our children, I believe in our future. But it's time that we as the responsible adults wake up and that we take our space and own it. Not only for ourselves, but on behalf of those who rely on us. And with that, I'm going to close this meeting. I'm going to thank you so much, Lulu, for stepping up, for being here, for agreeing to do this with us. I'm going to thank Advocate Kambula for coming in and giving us the clarification, because it kind of de-stressed me. I would probably have had a little mini explosion, but I didn't, thank God. And thank you each and every person who showed up today. Your willingness to listen, to engage, and to be involved is so commendable. Thank you very much. Luando, and with this, you may end our meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisca, and thank you to everyone. Bye.